In the episode Evergreen, we see the dark origin of the Ice King's cursed crown. In a more abstract sense, the episode explores the contrast between egotistical self-obsession and stoic acceptance, but I'll get to that later. The episode kicks off with Gunther, the story's young viewpoint character, playing with his pet Nina. Gunther stops playing to spy on a meeting. A comet is hurtling downwards, about to collide with the land and wipe out what little civilization there is. The four elementals, fire, ice, slime, and candy, are gathering to discuss their impending destruction. Urgent's Evergreen, the ice elemental, explains to the other three that he has already built a magical crown that can stop the comet, but first he needs the enchanted ruby eyes of the lava dog Magwood as a power source. The other elementals argue that the comet may kill them, but the elements they represent will live on. The crown will use wish magic, which they argue is too dangerous, so Evergreen freezes them and proceeds with his plan without their help. Evergreen, with the help of Gunther, his young unpaid servant, reaches the cabin of the lava dog Magwood. Gunther distracts the lava dog, giving Evergreen the chance to extract the enchanted ruby eyes. Just as Evergreen finishes inserting the ruby eyes into the crown, the enraged, eyeless lava dog charges in, knocking Evergreen away just as the comet is about to hit, and so Gunther is the one who puts on the crown. Evergreen yells at him to concentrate and wish to stop the comet, but as Gunther transforms, it becomes clear that his wish is to become like Evergreen. An aspect of this episode that I found particularly memorable is how chill most of the elementals are. They are incredibly, almost unbelievably, stoic in the face of their impending death. Evergreen's plan is to grant his greatest desire, but the others don't trust the plan, presumably because Evergreen is all about ego. They don't want him to have that kind of power. Wish magic itself is a problem because, as the fire elemental Balthus puts it, a misplaced wish could cause irreversible damage to the very structure of existence. Stoic to the end, they'd rather die than chance the fate of the world on an egotist. Stoicism is a theme that comes up repeatedly in Adventure Time, and I have an upcoming video about a character who is particularly stoic, so stay tuned for that. But in this episode, the stoicism of the other elementals is largely in the background. Front and center of the story is Evergreen's egotism, and the effect of that egotism on Gunther. In this episode, we see events through the eyes of the young and naive Gunther, who calls Evergreen master as though he is the magic user's apprentice. But Evergreen indicates at the beginning of the episode that teaching Gunther is beneath him, as Evergreen scoffs, and he expects me to teach him the ways of magic, as if. So while Evergreen has Gunther following him around and doing menial tasks for him, Gunther is getting nothing out of the relationship. And yet it's heavily implied that Evergreen has promised Gunther he will teach him magic, so their entire dynamic is based on deception. Honestly, this episode is a little painful to watch. Gunther's hero worship of such a selfish egotist reminds me of some of my poor decisions when I was younger in terms of my own role models. And speaking of role models, one of the more interesting aspects of this episode is its depiction of role models. Because Gunther sees Evergreen as his role model, he models many of the wizard's less impressive behaviors. We see this with Evergreen's constant dismissal of Gunther. Anything Gunther says that isn't what Evergreen already wants is met with flat refusal. Gunther, no. And we see Gunther treating his pet the same way when he's stressed. Nina, no, Gunther snaps, hitting poor Nina when she tries to get some of the water he's been told to fetch for Evergreen during their trip to find the ruby eyes. Ironically, by the time Gunther gets back with the water, Evergreen is already asleep and enclosed in a tent he conjured out of ice. Evergreen casually calls Gunther a blockhead, and so Gunther takes to calling Nina a blockhead, albeit with less contempt. Contempt may be motivating a lot of Evergreen's treatment of Gunther, but Gunther seems too young and naive to really understand this. Evergreen's most obvious problem, and the probable reason that none of the other elementals trust him, is that he's a bit of a raging narcissist. The greatest irony comes at the very end, when Gunther puts on the crown and can't handle its power. Evergreen tries to talk him through using the crown to save them. Use a concentration spell or a basic focusing charm like I taught you. I mean, like I meant to teach you, he says. It seems even in his final moments, Evergreen is lying to himself. Or alternatively, his own arrogance led him to ignore his own belief that he should teach Gunther in favor of using him as an unpaid servant, a slave. Dr. Ramani Durvasula, who completed her PhD on her specialty area, narcissism, writes in her book Don't You Know Who I Am that Narcissism is a pattern characterized by entitlement, grandiosity, lack of empathy, validation seeking, contempt, arrogance, and poor emotional regulation, especially rage. Now, I'm not trying to stamp a clinical diagnosis or a personality disorder onto Evergreen. As Dr. Ramani Dharavasula clarifies in her book, calling someone a narcissist is not a clinical diagnosis. It is descriptive and no different than identifying someone as friendly or kind or insensitive or risk-taking or rude or neurotic or agreeable. She further writes that narcissism is a interpersonally toxic pattern. If it is a person's predominant way of relating with the world, then it is not healthy for the people around the narcissistic person. It is also not healthy for the narcissist, but narcissists typically lack enough insight to recognize it. Lack of insight is what stops Evergreen from recognizing that his treatment of Gunther will eventually backfire. Keeping Gunther ignorant means that when push comes to shove, Gunther is too ignorant to be much help. This causes the disaster with the crown. With Evergreen as Gunther's role model, what chance does Gunther really have to use the crown properly? If Evergreen wants something, he lets nothing stand in his way. When the other elementals defy him, Evergreen doesn't just head off to do his own thing, he freezes them in solid ice. When he wanted a companion, he didn't take an apprentice, he stole an egg and mutated the infant reptile's brain to turn it into his slave. If he wants something, he goes for it without caring how it affects anyone else. When Gunther gets the crown and a chance for his deepest wish to come true, can we be surprised at the result? Can we be surprised Gunther exercises no self-control? After all, when did his role model ever exercise self-control and put first the welfare of anyone but himself? That wraps up my thoughts about Evergreen. If you enjoyed my take on this episode about a mutated reptile and his egomaniacal master, you can help this channel by liking and subscribing. Thank you to those of you who have subscribed already. Have a great weekend. Thank you for watching.